waiting, and the first item will be a presentation that'll probably take more than a few moments anyway, so we'll be in the middle of that, and Mr. Reyes, I'm sure, will get here shortly. Public Safety Committee meeting, President Jack Weiss, Greg Smith, and Dennis Zine. Colleagues, possible consent items per Ms. Stengel's recommendations are item number 4, which is training and academy reimbursements. Item number 6, which is Valley Cultural Center donation. Item 7, which is another donation to the fire department. And item 8, which is, relates to...
One question on 8, if we could...
No, let's do it, because when you ask one question, you really mean one. So,
I mean one.
who is here on item 8?
Fire department?
Item 8, anybody on the... Your answer's on his way? All right, well then, we'll wait till the person gets here, and then we'll handle the thing as just a quick item. All right, so with the exception of that question, can 4, 6, and 7 move on consent?
Yeah, go ahead and do 8, and I'll just ask offline before it comes to council.
Okay, Mr. Zine, 4, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
All right, so those are approved on consent. Let's start with Chief Beck, please. Mr. White, item 1.
John White, City Clerk. Item 1, Police Department to present verbal report relative to the Department's Scientific Investigation Division Task Force, the status of DNA testing, backlog, and cold hits, and the handling of latent prints and other related matters.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Great. Thank you for joining us, and take it away.
All right. This is the Department's report that has been given several times in public regarding the DNA Task Force, and I'll also include some information on where we are with the latent print unit. I know that Public Safety is very interested in both. When after the Controller's audit, after our own internal audit, and after the urging of Public Safety and the Council, Chief Bratton changed the way that we manage SID in late October, early November last year, and put it under my command. At that point, the way we measured how we were doing, and this is a really important piece on this, the way we measured how we were doing on our DNA analysis was through a property management system, which merely, when an officer books a piece of evidence, it shows a piece of evidence booked, and in this case it would show a sexual assault kit booked, and then if that kit was ever checked out, it would show that it was checked out, and that was the only system we had, and that's what we used to count the number of sexual assault kits we had in storage, which it gives a number, but it's not really an accurate number. It gives you a ballpark number of about how many of these things you're taking in, but it doesn't tell whether they're associated with a crime, whether they're, what their dates are, what their statute is. It doesn't show the status of the investigation in any way. So it's a very, very raw number. So when I took over, it was widely proclaimed that we had 7,000 sexual assault kits that had not been tested. So in order to spend the money that this committee and that the full council made available, as well as private donations, in order to spend it wisely and to give a true assessment of exactly what we had, we engaged in a survey or a study of the backlog. And this study, I took 50 detectives. Some of them worked full-time at it, some of them part-time. They spent over 2,000 hours in our 7 freezers that store DNA evidence. All these freezers are the size of a tractor trailer. They're huge. They inventoried and categorized all of our rape kits, sexual assault kits, going back to 1997. So, huge effort. 55,000 items of evidence were examined, and we'll start this slide and I'll go through what we found. All right, of those 55,000 items of evidence, Many are in frozen storage for reasons pertaining to the long-term storage of biological evidence. But they're not rape kits. 11,077 were. Of those 11,077 rape kits, and this number was accurate at the end of last year, and this number has changed since then. And I'll talk a little bit about that to give you an update on where we are. But at that time, as you can see, non-analyzed 55%, or 6,132 cases, going back to, like I said, 97. Next slide, Manny. Okay, so in every other study of backlog in policing or in law enforcement, we categorize backlog by case, not by item, not by assault kit. The reason that I think this is an important distinction is that the assault kits are collected from a medical facility. Sometimes, generally, they will have the items required for DNA analysis with a sexual assault kit, but many times the hospital puts other things in them, urine samples. Sometimes they'll put paperwork in them. What I'm trying to get at is many times there's multiple kits for one victim, sometimes up to 4 or 5 kits per victim. So this is an important distinction. You should count backlog by victim, not by item, because in the vast majority of cases, when we have 4 or 5 items, they're duplicitous, there's extra, and there's really no reason to be counting them. We're probably not going to pay for the outsourcing for multiple kits because the kits are the same. So what that 11,000 number represented was 9,911 victims, which is a better way to talk about this, and non-analyzed 5,193. So 5,193 victim cases were not analyzed. Manny? Of those non-analyzed cases, we did a study of the case dispositions. As you can see, cleared by arrest, 23%. DA declined prosecution for a variety of reasons, 36%. Investigation continued, in other words, an open case, 26%. And then an interesting category, not eligible to be uploaded into CODIS, 15%. And I'll explain what that is in a second. Next one, Manny. Okay, of the non-analyzed cases that were cleared by arrest, and remember this is that figure that we talked about, 39% or 468 of those, suspect profile is already in CODIS. Now, this is a distinction. We still are going to test this kit. The mandate is to test all kits, but the importance becomes diminished if the suspect's profile is already in CODIS for comparison purposes. DNA collected from suspect not yet analyzed or entered into CODIS, 21%, and then 448 DNA not collected. These are of the non-analyzed cases cleared by arrest. Manny? Of the cleared other, and this is where the DA rejects come in. 97% of those are DA rejects, 1,796 of those, and then 3% are watch commander rejects. In other words, the case on his face wasn't sufficient to go to the district. It wasn't sufficient to go to a prosecutor. Next one, Manny. On the investigation continued, 29% stranger crimes, or 402, known suspects, 70%, and 1% other factors. Now, this is an important slide because this slide tells us that there are, of the highest priority cases that should be analyzed, there's 402 of these that were not. Stranger crimes, suspects' ideas. So DNA is primary is an identification tool. It's important in some other aspects, but that's its primary value, is identifying suspects. So we had 402 cases that had not been analyzed, that were sitting in storage, that were stranger crimes. So one of the direct results of this is, as soon as I got that information, we moved those to the top of the list. Every one of those cases has been outsourced since we did this study. This, if nothing else, I'm happy about this piece, and believe me, this is, as you all know, this is This is a long-term, difficult project that we're involved in here. But we've moved those in front of the line. They're all outsourced. We will get the DNA profile of every one of those, and those, well, you know, those should be back within the next 30 to 60 days. So that's a good piece. Go ahead, man. Now, just to backtrack on that, the way we've been doing it in the past, and the way New York did it when they spent their $17 million on their backlog, was by date. And these cases would have been just thrown in by date with every other case, and which is not satisfactory, not the right way to do business. Anyway, they're not eligible to be entered into CODIS, and what makes a case eligible to be entered into CODIS is when a crime has occurred. CODIS is a crime database. If it's determined that no crime has occurred, you are, by law, cannot enter into CODIS. So there were approximately 770 of those cases, and you can see that 418 of those were unfounded based on the investigation. 245 of those were injury reports. In other words, at the time the kit was taken, it wasn't suspected that it was a crime, but they were taken for a variety of reasons. And 14% were non-crime reports. The best way to explain these, I'll give a couple of examples of why we would somebody would take a sexual assault kit when no crime has occurred. The most common way that these come to us is, one of the common ways is from the coroner's office. They'll have a suspicious death or a death of a female. A sexual assault kit will be taken, and then the coroner will determine, as you know, it takes a while to do their determination, and then we get the kit before the autopsy is even done. So we'll have booked a kit into evidence, and the autopsy will determine it's a natural and there's no suspicious circumstances. So we have a sexual assault kit that's in our backlog, and there's no crime. And even if I did test it, which I don't plan on doing, I can't upload it into CODIS. This also happens with children, with young children who mother may see trauma in the private areas. They go to the doctor, abundance of caution, they take a sexual assault kit, and it turns out to be some kind of a medical issue, an infection or whatever. And nobody's, and an interview's done, and nobody suspects that there's child abuse or anything like that. But we still have a sexual assault kit, and I still got to deal with it, and it still shows in our backlog. So these are a couple of ways. Another way, recantation. Victim makes a report, and then at some later time tells the police or the prosecutor, it didn't happen. I created this out of whole cloth because I was trying to cover for some other action. So we unfound it. So anyway, even if when we do that, and this is a small percentage of the total cases, but it's significant. I mean, this is 770. If we spend $1,000 each on these, we'd be not spending the city's money wisely, or the public's money wisely. So, and those are the non-uploadable in the CODIS. Okay, Manny, go ahead. Get to the end? Okay, so when you do all the math on this, when you eliminate the multiple kits per victim, when you take out the non-uploadable into CODIS, you end up with a number that we think is more representative of what a true backlog could be classified as. And at the time that we did this, we determined that our belief was there was 4,423 untested CODIS eligible cases that could be considered our true backlog. And these are the cases that we've been working to outsource based on a prioritization system since we did this study. Since October, and this is a little bit different number than I gave to council last week because we had another 122 this week, we have outsourced almost 1,700 sexual assault kits. We do about 120 a week in outsourcing. It takes an incredible amount of manpower, human power resources to do this, but we are determined that we will continue on this path until we get the kind of results that I can be proud of talking here instead of apologetic. So that's where we are with the DNA kits. A couple of things, and I talked about them in full council, but I'll repeat them here. All this work that the detectives did for us, it will just be a snapshot in time unless we continue to categorize these kits as they come in correctly. We can't just add them to a property management system and expect that to be good. So we're actively involved with other members of the department and with ITA in developing a database that will be specific to sexual assault kits, that will contain all of this information, that will categorize cases much as I've done for you here, that will allow us, keeping in mind that we intend to test all kits, but will allow us to spend the money just like we have done so far on a prioritization or a categorization scheme that makes the most sense on a law enforcement issue, on a law enforcement level, on a human level, and on all counts. So we're in the process of developing that. Many times when I report to you, I will always specify I may still use the property management numbers because I'm not done with this other database, and you're used to those numbers, and it shows progress, but that's not where we're going to be in the near future once the regular database is done, once the sexual assault kit database is done. So we're working very hard on that. I expect that in the next few months we'll make some significant progress, and I'll be able to shift the way that we report these to you a little bit. But I'll always tell you exactly which numbers I'm talking about, and I'll be able to tell you exactly what these numbers mean rather than this giant number that was talked about prior with no substance to it. So that's the DNA side of it.
Are you also going to be talking about fingerprints this morning?
I thought maybe you. Well, I'll do both, or unless you want to ask DNA questions, then I'll do.
Well, yeah, why don't we split it up and see if they're DNA questions? I just want to say that I mentioned this in public before, but I remember literally the first moment you got this assignment from Chief Bratton, and you and I were talking, and I said, well, what are you going to do with the 7,000 kits? And you said, it may not be 7,000. I said, no, obviously it's 7,000. And you said, it may not be 7,000. You need to let me get in there and look at it. And I didn't quite believe you at the time. And because it just seemed, I just took it on faith that there was this number, we'd all use this number, and you went in there, and not just you, but your detectives went in there, and I saw them, and they...
I only went in there a couple of times. Don't give me any credit.
Yeah. No, I mean, I observed what your detectives did. It was extraordinary, and that you came out with these numbers that everyone can take to the bank, and then that you've been able to make decisions such as, well, if you have an unanalyzed stranger rape investigation still opening, that goes to the top of the priority list. You can do that now, which is and then in the future, obviously, that's the way you guys will prioritize things. It's just very impressive.
And I think it's important that everybody understand that I'm not trying to put value judgments on a victim's rape case. I'm just trying to put the right emphasis on DNA as a tool for what it is, which is an identification tool. I'm not saying that acquaintance rapes are not just as horrible. This is not, in no way should this be taken, because I don't believe that. I believe that all rapes are horrific crimes that we should prosecute vigorously. But what I'm trying to point out here is that you have to, especially because we have limited money. Now, if we were just going to spend our way out of it like New York did when they had the problem in '99, then this would be a different story, because you guys would just be telling me, Charlie, spend whatever you got to spend, and then I just do that. But that's not what you're telling me. You're giving me a finite amount of money for a difficult problem, and I'm trying to make sure that we spend it just as smartly as I possibly can, just because I know that you expect that, and I expect it from my folks, and that's the way we should do it.
Thank you, Chief. On the DNA issue, any questions or comments?
What's the status of the grant?
I'm sorry.
What's the status of the DNA grant?
The spend?
No, we were waiting for the approval on the recent one.
Right, and you know what? I got my grant folks here, and they can talk to you specifically about that, because I don't know where you are on the discussion.
Right behind you.
Morning, David DiLiberto with RHT. The status of the grant, of the current grant that we're working at, I was able to locate some additional monies and transfer it into the overtime account. So we do have overtime to continue working through the end of this grant. If anything changes with that, I'll let you know. But from that standpoint, it looks good. We submitted the grant for next year, and we should be hearing about it anytime soon.
And we're actively looking at some other grants in the stimulus package, and I mean, I'm turning over every rock I can find.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I think that's, so on DNA, I think they're, appreciate the report, and there are no questions.
All right, so on the latent print side of the house, you're all very aware of the issues that came to light in the print unit, and let me give you an update on where we are with that. The primary issue is the individuals that were involved in the misidentification cases. The secondary issue is how are we going to turn this into a better run, better staffed, more professional, accredited piece of the Los Angeles Police Department like it should be. The first part, we went to the district attorney, the city attorney, and got all the cases in the history of the examiners involved in the misidentification. That was 700 cases, about 700. We also pulled their last 3 years' work, and because that's how far back our accountability system goes. And this combined made a total of about 1,100, almost 1,200 cases. So we are done. You know, we set up a reexamination team of about 9 folks, our most senior, most experienced print examiners, and we had them double blind. In other words, nobody knows what they're working on. Nobody's knowing what's been done with this case before. Nobody knows if it's the first time or the last time it's been seen. Double blind, re-examined all those cases. Well, not all, because we won't be done for another week or so. And with the goal of 2 things: make sure we haven't found anybody else guilty that isn't guilty, and then 2, get some kind of idea what kind of training needs these folks have, because all 5 of them are still with us, and their discipline is already been administered here, so they will be with us. So we have to figure out what we're going to do with them, because I pulled them out of field duties or out of identification duties in the meantime, so we can establish those 2 things. So far, of all those cases, I have found some that should have been identified that weren't, but I have found none that were misidentified. So that's good. That's good. That's good. And it's also good that we found, and I'm not going to, because we're not done, I won't release the whole number yet, but it's also good that we found some missed MISSED identifications, because that shows that it's a reliable audit that's being done correctly. You know, if I'd have found nothing, then I'd have been really upset, because I don't believe there's nothing. There's always, you know, you can, fingerprint identification on latent prints, not person-to-person comparison, but on latent prints is an art, you know, and you're going to have differing opinions on this stuff, and it is a, anyway, so I'm positive, I'm feeling positive about that. We've gone to the double-blind study and double-blind comparisons across the board until we get everything accredited and up to the place where I think it should be. This is extremely time-consuming, and nobody else does it for that reason. But it is the surest way to guarantee results. So we've gone to that, and we're actively working on the second part, which is the improvement of facilities. We're looking at obviously everybody's leaving Parker Center, and there's no place in the new administration building for the print examiners who live at Parker Center now. So, and they're scattered everywhere. It's just not right. They're all over that building. I'll be glad to take you. They work in the kitchen on the 8th floor, the old kitchen from when Dennis worked there. So anyway, we're actively looking at a new building. That will be coming to you. You know, that purchase will be coming to you. It's extremely important. I know that it's a bad time to ask for these things. We've, you know, Yvette's here, and she can give you the status on that if you're interested in it. But you guys the council will be getting this, and it's really important, because if we don't get them in a proper facility with proper controls over evidence and proper workspaces, then I'm going to have a very difficult time getting them accredited, and that is my end goal with the print unit, is to get them accredited, asking it. So that's a big step and something that we haven't had before. So that's where we are with that. So by another week or so, we'll be done with all the re-examinations, and I'll report back to you on that.
Tell us a little more, what the difficult request that you're going to be bringing forward will be what precisely?
It'll be the approval of the new purchase of the new facility for latent prints, and this is it's going to be some money, and it's going to be in a time when we have little, but I think it's very important, and if we want to get to the place where we need to be with this, then that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Questions? Shazai?
The concern I have is regarding the personnel issue. You mentioned they were disciplined or still with the department. Were there any criminal charges brought against any of them? And what about the supervisors that were supposed to make sure that the job was done properly?
Disciplined also? No criminal charges?
Why not termination if they were not doing what they needed to do to that extent?
Well, and these cases are a couple of years old. I wasn't in the review process or their chain when they happened. I can tell you what I believe to be the answer to that question. They were looked at as a training issue rather than a malfeasance issue, and that's the way they were handled. Now there were penalties attached, but they certainly weren't termination. Right, but not. And Yvette points out something that is true, is one was terminated, but there was a multiplicity of factors, not just the misidentifications that caused that termination, but the misidentifications were a part of that.
So was it just sloppy work, negligent, or was it intentional to try and let bad guys go?
No, it wasn't intentional to try to let bad guys go. For one thing, these were missed IDs, so they weren't letting people go. They identified the wrong person, so they in these two cases they identified the wrong person, and so this was, I believe at this time, and one of the reasons we're doing this audit of all their past cases is so I can draw a better conclusion about exactly the question you're asking me. But at this point, if you were to ask me what I think right now, absent looking at everything they've done in the last 3 years and all their old identifications, which is what we're doing, I would say that it's sloppy work.
Okay.
And that was what the discipline was based on. Now I'm re-examining, because something that I think should have been done then is this re-examination. We're doing it now, and I'll deal with it. And if I come to the conclusion that it was other than sloppy work, then they won't be doing fingerprint identification anymore, even if I have to keep them, because obviously I can only do, as you all well know, I can only do what I can do in personnel. So.
Well, there is that process of discipline within the Civil Service Commission and appeals, et cetera. As long as it's sloppy is one thing, negligent and trying to circumvent the system is something entirely different.
Right, and I haven't seen that yet. Although I am worried about the missed IDs, because missed IDs, well, first of all, they're a missed opportunity in many cases, to prosecute the guilty, and they also can tend to show a unwillingness to be engaged in the criminal justice process. In other words, as you and I are fingerprint examiners, if we don't identify somebody, we don't have to go to court. So there's always that. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's something that I'm looking at, and that is very important, a very important piece of this, because I want to have a full functioning lab system that does what it's supposed to do.
And they're not certified? The fingerprint analysis is not
they're
certified?
not. The lab is not. The technical lab, which is the fingerprint lab, is not certified.
Okay, I remember during the OJ case there was a controversy about the lab and certification. Are we going to try and get that
That is my end game on this, is to get to the point with the fingerprint side where they are certified, and that is the all of the things that I'm doing with them lead to that. That's where we're going. That's what we want. That's where we need to be. Not all fingerprint labs are certified. I mean, many police departments aren't, but that's not where the Los Angeles Police Department needs to be. So,
But when it goes to court and the individual's been identified by prints, maybe not DNA, a witness and prints, and we don't have the credentials to show the accuracy and the honesty, then that could jeopardize that criminal case.
it can. Obviously, that's an issue. You need to be accredited for a lot of reasons, not just best practices, but also so that you're more effective in your prosecutions. Now, we convict without being accredited, and have for years, but it's not the best way.
Right.
And that's not the way we're going to do it.
Well, I trust your leadership and judgment in making it right.
Well, I hope that trust is earned.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Smith, Mr. Reyes? Well, thank you very much for, again, not just for the presentation, but for the amazing work you're doing over there. You're definitely making major changes. We all appreciate that.
Well, and it's certainly, that's very, I'm in an enviable position. I get all the credit. There's a lot of people working very hard at this, and they have a lot more, all of us have significant skin in the game on this. But a lot of these folks have been, they've been attacked, and they're made to feel like they're not doing their job, and there's it's a very emotional piece. We're trying to get them to recover on this. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Okay, so that'll be that item. Mr. White, call the next item, please.
Item 2, Resolution Weiss, Hahn, Garcetti, requesting that the city attorney prepare an ordinance to prohibit ownership, possession, purchase, or receipt of a firearm for 10 years from the date of a misdemeanor conviction for the following crimes: carrying a concealed weapon, possession of an assault weapon, burglary, and any misdemeanor where, in conjunction with that misdemeanor, the defendant was convicted of a gang enhancement, and to include in the city's 2008-09 state legislative program support for similar state legislation.
Morning. Whoever wants to take it away, feel free to take it away. Mr. Shutan.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Peter Shutan, Deputy City Attorney, Gang Unit and Gun Violence Section. We're here today to discuss and support the efforts to add some additions to the California state law that prohibits certain people from possessing firearms. The proposal at this time is to add certain crimes to 12021 of the Penal Code, which is the section that prohibits certain offenders from possessing firearms in the future. The 12021A section is what we commonly call the felon with a gun. The C section is that section which delineates misdemeanors for which, if you are convicted, you are prohibited from possessing firearms for 10 years. Most of those are assaultive crimes, battery, assault with a deadly weapon, etc. And 12021E, which was amended in 2003 in AB 319, affects all those crimes that, if juveniles are adjudicated for those crimes, they would be prohibited from possessing a firearm until they're 30 years old. The discussion here today relates to 12021C and the addition to those assaultive crimes, adding illegal possession of firearms to future prohibition, which makes perfect sense. If you have now been, it only affects those who have been convicted of the proposal would be 12025 and 12280, which is the assault weapons charge. And I think also the burglary is included in the proposal. What it would do is, if you are convicted of a misdemeanor for those crimes, then at the time of your conviction, you would then be prohibited for 10 years of possessing any firearm and purchasing a firearm. We think that's a good idea. There might be other crimes. For example, we're talking about 12025, which is carrying a concealed firearm, and 12280, possession of an assault weapon. And as with 319 in 2003, we think that 12031, which is carrying a loaded firearm, might reasonably be considered as well as a potential prohibitive offense. And 12034, the misdemeanor section, for knowingly allowing a firearm in the vehicle. But we think that these are good ideas. These are things that would be helpful in the fight against keeping people who have already proven that they cannot be responsible with firearms from going out and legally buying one.
Thank you, Mr. Schutzen.
Yes, Kevin McCarthy, Gang and Narcotics Division. We work very closely with the city attorney on a lot of aspects of legislation, and this is just one additional one. And we agree that this would be good legislation in that it just gives us another tool to keep guns off the street. And I think, Rick, you have some detail on that.
Detective Tompkins with the Gun Unit, LAPD, Gang and Narcotics Division. We've had a huge problem with 12280. A lot of our gun trafficking cases within the city of Los Angeles usually end with about 6 or 7 felony charges. When we go to the courthouse, there's usually a plea bargain or a plea deal, and the person will take the 12280, which very quickly turns into a misdemeanor violation, and within a short period of time, the same guns that we're taking from them are going back to him. So 12280 would be an outstanding thing to have a 10-year prohibition on, along with 12025, and I too concur with 12031 and 12034.
I would add that when these misdemeanors result in convictions, they will generally get probation. And probation is generally going to be 24 months or 3 years. And they will generally have a firearms restriction for that limited period of time of probation. What this restriction would say, would add, is by state law, they will now be prohibited. And the gun dealers will know when they submit their names to DOJ that they are a prohibited offender and cannot purchase that firearm, and the dealer will then be able to get back before the transaction is completed and be able to advise the purchaser that they cannot have the gun and will not release it to them.
Colleagues, before we get to questions or comments, we have at least one comment card from Suzanne Verge. I don't know if there's anybody else from the advocate community who also wanted to address the council, but you're more than welcome to come up, Ms. Verge, and if there's any other advocate here that I missed, feel free to put in a card as well. Yeah, I thought I saw more than one person here. Thank you.
We have Sherry here from My name is Suzanne Verge. I'm from the Los Angeles chapter of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, also here on behalf of the San Fernando Valley chapter, and we support this. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you.
Sherry Barnett, President of the Board of Women Against Gun Violence. It's very good to be here. Women Against Gun Violence was founded by Ann Rice Lane 15 years ago and has done much work for sensible gun laws. We strongly support this, and we wanted to make that known today.
Thank you, Ms. Verge and Ms. Barnett. And please have a seat in the audience, but stick around. And Mr. Schutzen, please come back. Colleagues, questions for the City Attorney's Office or the Police Department?
A couple. The ordinance, it would apply to people driving through or living in the city of Los Angeles. So if they're in the city of San Fernando or in the city of Culver City, it would not apply.
Well, my comments really went to the idea related to making it state legislation.
Well, I agree with this 100%. I just want to see it effective so someone is not in the city of San Fernando, which is a small community, or in the city of Culver City adjacent to Pacific Division. Well, that's King's X because they're across the border. I think it needs to be on the books. It needs to be a state law more than a municipal ordinance, because a municipal ordinance is only good in the city of Los Angeles, whether they're living or driving through LA City. The other question I had deals with the burglary. If you're including burglary, which is a felony, why aren't you including robbery? Well, why is it specifically misdemeanor, but then you throw in burglary? Why not robbery if you're going to do burglary?
Burglary actually can be filed as a misdemeanor or a felony. It is only included to the extent that it would be filed as a misdemeanor, because as a felony, it's already included in 12021.
So what happens with a robbery that's reduced down to theft?
Well, it would be based on the conviction charge, so that if they're arrested for robbery and the conviction is for a misdemeanor burglary, it would fall within the amended state law that would include misdemeanor burglary. However, there's a lot of misdemeanor burglaries that are straight, like a commercial burglary can be a straight misdemeanor, or a aggravated theft could be charged as a burglary as well. Someone walks in with a bag to a market with proof that their intent was when they walked in.
Or I'm just thinking if we're including something where I've seen a robbery charge that's reduced when it goes for prosecution. It's reduced to theft, or a purse snatch where there's force or fear, reduced to theft. I want to make it inclusive as possible. So I'm trying to think to plug any loophole.
Well, I think
unless it's already there.
The problem, if it's a problem, is that we can only make those prohibitions based on a conviction. And if there is a charge of robbery based on the arrest that is pled to something else, it is that something else that will determine whether or not it's a prohibitive offense.
Well, that's the question, though. If it comes down to a robbery charge, a purse snatch, for example, where there's force or fear, which is a robbery, a felony, but by the time it gets to court and by the time they plea bargain, they're copping out to theft, petty theft.
Then it's not a robbery.
It's not a robbery, but then the burglary that's reduced, I'm trying to plug that loophole if we can, because there's many cases where there's a robbery charge, but it gets pled down to something lower. Right. And anyway, if it's possible to include it, if it can't, we
can certainly look into that and see what we can do with that.
But I think it's a great idea to do it. And if you think the last couple of weeks there's been 4 Oakland officers shot, and then 3 officers shot on the East Coast, 7 police officers shot. I mean, gun violence is definitely something we need to deal with in this particular situation to make it throughout the state, so it's just not in L.A. City. Because if you go to Beverly Hills, it doesn't apply. You go to Redondo Beach, it doesn't apply. It's got to be broader than this. So
absolutely correct.
The state legislature will pick up on that. Thanks, Pete.
Mr. Smith?
Can you give me some more definition of what gang-related misdemeanors would be?
Well, you mean as worded in the resolution?
Yeah, I mean, do they have to be identified by a gang unit as being part of the gang? Do they have to be under an injunction? Where do you draw the line on what a gang-related misdemeanor is?
Part of the discussion has included any crime in which the STEP Act 18622 has been alleged and proven as an enhancement. That would be one way to do it. You mentioned the injunction. There's been little discussion about the injunctions. The problem with the charge under an injunction 166 is that those charges can also be a result of other types of court violations of court order, like domestic violence or other court orders. Maybe a violation of probation could be characterized. Any violation of probation could be characterized as a 166. So that trying to use a gang injunction might be problematic, but we absolutely can look in further into developing that, if that's something council would like.
The simplest way that would occur to me would be to ensure that when the enhancements, gang enhancements, are part of the conviction. I mean, that's the most, right? I mean, that's what
that would be the cleanest, absolutely, because then we will have proven, we will have alleged and proven that this person, one, is guilty of the underlying crime, and 2, that it was for the benefit, at the direction, or in association with a gang member.
Mr. Reyes?
Well, first I want to say thank you for your hard work and sharing this insight. I'm Mr. Shuchan. Back in the mid-'90s, we started working on the CLEAR program back when. And, through those experiences, become familiar with the impacts of these policies on our youth and the whole notion of the gang culture. Inadvertently, we end up pushing where it's the youngest ones in the gangs who end up doing the gang violence, I mean the gun violence, because everyone else in the pecking order has already committed a crime. They don't want to be caught with a gun, and so we're pushing the violence and the actual act of using a gun to younger and younger kids. And that's my assumption, but knowing what work we've done together and the work you have experienced with the gangs, are we inadvertently pushing in that direction? I want to support this, but I also know for every action is a reaction. Are we creating that kind of environment? Are we stimulating that type of a cause and effect?
Well, I think if you're talking about the current resolution, Councilman, that this really doesn't play into that concern as much. I think because this would amend 12021C, which only relates to adults.
Okay.
AB 319, which we did in 2003, did in fact do pretty much the same thing, except as it relates to juveniles who've been adjudicated for those crimes. But what it did was, it didn't provide, what it did is it required DOJ to let a firearms dealer know that this person can't have a gun now until they're 30, as it relates to juveniles. I think that's a constructive thing that we did there, because they, as minors, were adjudicated and proven to have been irresponsible with a firearm. So give them some time to grow up before they get a chance to legally purchase a gun at that point.
Right.
But this statute doesn't, this recommendation wouldn't relate to minors.
That's not okay, thank you.
Let me ask the department. I understand that you've got some specific examples perhaps you can share with us.
Again, Detective Tompkins, a couple years back, we had it was a major case in the city of Los Angeles. It was a gun trafficking case. The suspect sold one of our undercover officers a firearm. We arrested him, took him into custody, took I think it was 9 or 10 guns out of his vehicle, and quickly wrote a search warrant on his residence. During the service of the warrant, we took a little over 400 guns out of his house. It was an outstanding case. It was an outstanding investigation. I think at the end, when we presented it to the DA's office, this one happened to be outside the county at that point. But when we presented it to the DA's office, we had, I think, 7 felony charges. At the time, we were aware of 12280 being an issue. We wanted that one. That would have been the second or third charge file. It would not have been the primary. We followed that case for approximately 2 years, staying on top of it, going to each court proceeding. At one point, they had a court proceeding that we weren't present, and they pled out to the 12280B, which was quickly dropped down to 17B4, down to a misdemeanor. And then with a very short period of time, I was getting letters from him requesting his firearms back. And this does have...
So what precisely did he plead to?
12280, possession of an assault weapon, which is a felony.
So the assault weapon charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
And so even though he was convicted of the possession of an assault weapon, there was no legal prohibition, state or city, that restricted him from possessing firearms?
No, sir. But as Peter mentioned earlier, he was on probation for a short period of time, but that was it for his prohibition.
So once that ended, there was no legal prohibition on him?
That's correct. He was able to buy and sell guns again, as he was prior. This has happened probably about 7 or 8 times in our cases. Once again, we're aware of it. The DA's office that we usually deal with, they're aware of it. But somehow, as the case goes on, somehow it does get knocked down. Defense attorneys that are aware of the gun laws will push for the 12280 because they realize it is. It can be knocked down to a misdemeanor.
The 12280, which is the misto assault weapon.
Yeah, it is.
The wobbler section.
Yeah, it's a wobbler. Felony section, which can be knocked down to a miss, or it's a wobbler that can be filed as a misdemeanor.
Assault weapons?
Yes.
What jurisdiction was that, where he was arrested?
Ventura County.
I'm
sorry, sir. The arrest occurred in the city of Los Angeles.
But the residence was in Ventura County.
And that's where they filed the charges in Ventura?
Yes, sir.
And the Ventura court wasn't as strict as we seem to be here?
They were initially, but again, that case went on for about 2 years. So by the time that thing got to the 2-year mark, it seemed to have lost a little bit of its
Did he get his guns back? Did he get his guns back?
Not yet, sir.
He still wants them back?
Yes, sir.
Any other examples? I mean, that's pretty...
They're all basically the same, sir. We've done quite a few in the city. And like I said, we do battle with the DA's office. We try to educate them on that section. Again, if we have a person for 12072D, which is the unlawful transfer of a firearm in the city of Los Angeles, a handgun is a felony. If we go to his house, more often than not, we will come up with an assault weapon in his residence. So we do have to add that to the felony charges we're presenting to the DA's office. And again, if the defense counsel is up on his laws and the DA's maybe not so much concerned with the 12280 as a felony charge, a lot of times they will agree to that. And it flows through the court system very smoothly. The only interference would be from our unit or someone from the Los Angeles Police Department saying, please do not file this section. We want the 12072 or one of the other felony sections.
But just for people, the 172 is which?
12072D is the unlawful transfer of a firearm.
Which carries the prohibition with it.
It's a felony crime.
Okay.
On a handgun. It can't be knocked down to a misdemeanor.
All right, well, thank you for that presentation. Here's what I suggest. The measures before us in two parts. We should go forward with putting the city on record in support of the state legislation. That'll go to rules, I believe, next. And I think it's everyone's hope that the state will pass that, but you never have any guarantee of that. At the same time, we're asking Mr. Schutan to come back here with a report on a municipal-only ordinance. So if you could bring the municipal-only ordinance back with a report, and hopefully by the time you get back here, we'll see some substantial progress at the state level. But
what I will do is I will also consult our civil side, because they would be the ones who would want to put together and determine, I think, the viability of a municipal ordinance affecting a state law, which would is what you were.
So let's just I'm just saying let's work on both tracks, and so we'll do that.
We would be glad. We'll work with your office on putting together, working on the state legislation.
I'm just want to say, Ms. Stengel says we need to instruct the CLA to write a report for rules. Yes. But they would do that anyway, wouldn't it? No? Okay. So we say that and they do it. All right.
I got a follow-up question. I know this is going to be referred to Rules and Government Committee. Are there any state legislators that we're working with that would want to introduce this? We could streamline that.
Assemblyman De Leon has introduced this already, right? Yes, no, maybe?
I'm not sure exactly what form it's in, but yes, I believe he's supportive of the concept.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. So that'll be the action with two parts. We'll move the recommendation on the state one ahead to rules, and civil and criminal will work together on getting us a municipal ordinance back here as well with a report, and I understand all the issues. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, so that is that item. That'll pass unanimously. The next item, Mr. White, please.
Item 3, motion Alarcon, Weiss, Rosendahl relative to establishing a task force to develop a comprehensive strategy to address lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, domestic violence issues.
Charlie Beck Day?
You know what? It's always Charlie Beck Day. It's a good day.
Good morning once again. I'm Charlie Beck. And I'm joined by
Sandy Jo MacArthur, Incident Management Training Bureau.
Tara Slavin, Domestic Violence Attorney, Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center, and also Chair of the LGBT Committee for the Domestic Violence Task Force.
Okay. Good morning, and look forward to your report, everybody. Thank you.
Well, my understanding is that the committee wanted the department to come back with two pieces, one on tracking and the other on training. I will talk about tracking, and Sandy Jo was being in charge of all training. We'll talk about training. But they're combined issues. We need to train our folks to be more perceptive and attuned to this issue so that we track it better. We have through our crime analysis details and the way that we code crime, we have a method by which to code crimes of this nature. But after I did my review of how many were captured by that coding last year, it becomes painfully obvious that we're not capturing all of them. So there's two reasons for that. One, or there could be two reasons for that. One, we're not, three actually. One, our crime analysis detailed people are not attuned enough with the issue and capturing it. Three, our patrol folks that do the reports are not including these issues in the reports because they're not attuned to it. Or the third issue is that the community as a whole is not giving the information to the officers. So we need to work on all three. You know, I don't think any one of the three is the primary blame here, but we need to work on all three. So I'll give it over to Sandy Jo, and she can talk about the training part.
Good morning. I have a sergeant specifically assigned to the task force working very closely in designing the training, but we do see a variety of levels to do the training. One, as Chief Beck just said, is it's very important that our people who code this understand how to code it and appropriately put it into the system. So we're looking at a variety of different levels. One level that we're very comfortable with right now that we think we do a really good job is our recruit training. We have quite a significant amount of training that goes on throughout our entire program, some specific to the topic, and then we also embed it in a variety of scenarios so the recruits don't just get a one-time inoculation. We have a state mandate that every 2 years our first responders are to be trained on domestic violence issues, including these specific issues. We're not real comfortable that we think we need to really step that up, and that is what Jason's been working closely with the committee on. We will be looking at making sure that our training is audience specific. So we'll have specific to detectives, specific to CAD, and also specific to our first responders working the black and whites, and also then to the watch commanders and supervisors that will be approving the booking approvals. So we believe we'll have a really comprehensive program. The coursework will be a combination of some live training and some of our e-learning training. We have with the state the opportunity for every approximately 20 minutes of training, we can get an hour of post-credit, because when you take an hour of curriculum and turn it into an e-learning, it turns out to be about 15 to 20 minutes. So we're working really closely with the committee on the training because it's going to be very important. And then, of course, anything that we can help them with when the community education goes out there, we'll be hand in hand with them as well.
I want to just step back a second and say that we've been meeting since September, which means we've actually met at this point 6 times. We've had approximately 14 to 20 members per meeting. This includes members of the community who are providing specific services for LGBTQ domestic violence survivors and batterers, members from domestic violence shelters, domestic violence community overall. We've had almost several LAPD officers at every committee meeting, as well as the city attorney, a representative, and then just interested members of the LGBT community. So it's been a really great turnout, and I would say in the short amount of times we've met, we've actually had a lot of progress. There's sort of 2 prongs. One is more focused on the LAPD specifically, and then the other one is a sort of broader community outreach, looking at a way to provide sort of overall comprehensive, more efficient and more effective services to LGBTQ survivors. And what we realized very much right at the beginning is that we haven't had any sort of needs assessment or looking at what really are the needs of the community members or needs of service providers in over 9 years. The most recent study was really in 2000, and the most comprehensive study was in 1996. So we've actually partnered with UCLA. We've had a member of UCLA attending from the School of Public Health, and we've actually put together a needs assessment that we've been revising also in the process, and we are planning to kind of start that process. And that's going to go out to both LGBT community members as well as service providers, both traditional domestic violence service providers as well as other service providers, because oftentimes people in this community are not necessarily seeking or seeing it as domestic violence because the education and awareness about the issue is still really minimal. So that's sort of one prong that we're following. Additionally, I think in terms of LAPD, we did have an initial trying to how do we get this information from LAPD out to the community, because one of the issues that comes up is that members of the community are very reluctant to let LAPD know that it's intimate partner violence and may not be disclosing. So one of the forums that we're taking for this is the Chiefs Forum. And we had our first meeting in November. We were actually supposed to have a meeting in April, but because of conflicts, it got canceled, and we'll be doing it in June. And at that point, usually we get about 60 members of the community there. And what we're trying to do is actually get the information out to the community of why it's important that it be disclosed as intimate partner violence. What are the differences between it being a simple battery and assault? what sort of chain happens when it's domestic violence, and why they may be asking questions along this line. And we're also going to try to get out some information sheets. So we're working on that for June, and I think one of the other things that came up is we're looking at sort of the description analysis and being able to describe within that description analysis so that it can be better coded the nature of the relationship and some of the injuries that are being sustained.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there questions that you have on Mr. Reyes?
In terms of outreach, if my assumptions are that in the English-speaking world, there's hesitation and there's difficulty in trying to inform and educate. My assumptions are that in the Spanish-speaking and or other languages, is it that much more difficult? Is there any strategy, or is that being contemplated in terms of outreach?
Absolutely. We're actually, I would say 30% of the clients that we serve are, probably 45% of the clients we serve are definitely of different ethnicities, 30% being Latino. And the barriers are just that much more, particularly when people are coming from other countries, and the extreme homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia may mean that one of the threats the batterer uses is to say, I'm going to out you to your parents in that country, who may have already threatened to kill them if that was ever discovered. So that's a definite barrier. And I know that there was conversations with Alarcon's office about doing a specific Spanish training in the Valley. We've also done some Spanish radio, and all of our flyers are both in English and Spanish, and we're trying to look and examine more ways to do outreach within these more underserved communities.
There are some advocate groups in the Pico Union Westlake area, transgender specifically, and I just want to make sure that our office makes you aware of those organizations, because they do have a pretty strong network.
Yeah.
And it's going to sound a little ironic, but work with the church as well, and how the outreach is implemented in the Spanish-speaking world. Has that been contemplated?
We're actually, I'm funded through the Department of Justice, and we have 3 faith-based providers, and one of the things that we see in our future kind of spectrum is kind of trying to do a whole day around ministry and LGBT domestic violence, and that would include in multi-ethnic and lingual communities.
The Las Memorias Wall has a pretty strong organization on the east side, northeast,
Okay.
and ministers and different representatives of the cloth have been involved in that organization, and it was that's pretty startling to see how expansive it was.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another group I'm hoping you can touch bases with.
Yeah, it would be great. I mean, any contacts we'd have, we'd definitely love to outreach to them.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief and Chief, for that presentation. Ms. Stengel informs me that the recommendation in the motion should be amended by asking that the existing domestic violence task force add this to their current responsibilities. Is that, there's an action item in the motion here? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Chiefs are nodding their heads? Yes. Go with that? All right, so that'll be the instruction of the committee, and we appreciate the report. Thank you all for coming. Mr. White.
Item 5, City Attorney Report and Ordinance amending sections 22.21.2 and 5.181 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to include emergency ambulance billing accounts among those eligible to be referred to the Department of Finance for collection.
Hello.
Good morning, Peter Echeverria from the City Attorney's Office. I'm joined by Carmen Hawkins as well. You have 2 ordinances before you that together would have the effect of both authorizing and directing that ambulance billings, which have heretofore been handled exclusively by the fire department, at the point that they become uncollectible by the fire department, be transmitted to Office of Finance or to one of the collection agencies that is available to the city for collection efforts. The history of the handling of these accounts is different from the other accounts that are referred to for collection, in part because they have so many unique aspects to them, to those accounts as well. Many of them are either government-funded fee payments or insurance-funded payments, and the collection efforts are complicated by that as well. Also, they become a lot slower. these ordinances recognize that and provide for example, a delinquency period of 90 days rather than the usual 30 days for accounts that the city has, because oftentimes the collection effort is made and then the referral goes to the either Medicare, Medi-Cal, or to the insurance agency, and it takes a little more time to do that, to accomplish that. Also, the time within which the account is required to be referred is a bit longer. It's 9 months rather than the usual delinquency time. It's so that the fire department can actually exhaust those efforts that are reasonable for the billing agency to make at the outset. That basically, in a nutshell, is what the two ordinances would do. The revised ordinances, which were transmitted by date of April 1, 2009, are the ones which we would recommend be adopted if you so wish to recommend to the full council.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Mr. Reyes?
Yeah, just one. Are there exceptions for officers who, for example, face a hardship and have to leave out of state and still become an officer in that respective state? Are we allowing for those types of nuances?
There are, as I recall, there are exceptions for those who qualify as low income for subsidies. There are also exceptions for 3 specific categories. Those are inmates at either city or county jails who have to be transported due to emergencies, city employees who suffer injury or illness, and also members of the Police Reserve Corps who suffer injury or illness while on duty.
And the reimbursement for officers who get rehired, it's not just limited to a specific geographic area, correct? It's wherever they end up out of the city of Los Angeles.
I'm sorry?
In terms of the reimbursement for officers who get rehired within a certain geographic region, such as LA, San Bernardino, or Ventura County.
I think we may be talking about 2 different items.
Okay.
This is the ambulance billings, and I believe the reimbursement that you're talking about is for item 4, which is...
I jumped the gun.
But all right.
Okay. Other questions, Mr. Zine?
The fiscal impact shows that in February 2008, report to council, Office of Finance reported LAFD had over 140.1 million in accounts receivable beyond 90-day due date. 97% of that amount, or 136 million, uncollected ambulance fees. So it's a huge hit on the city's budget. $140 million uncollected fees. So whatever we can do to recoup those dollars, because if we don't have the money to pay for the ambulance and the fire department, the personnel, no one's going to get any service.
Correct. And I think that's what council saw. That's the information that was presented to council, and that's what's behind this effort to strengthen those collection efforts, realizing that in many instances we will be very limited in our ability to collect.
Well, somebody's got to collect and pay the bill somehow. Mr. Smith shows that this has been going on for 6 years.
Right.
6 years, and we still 140 million, and the mayor's doing a news conference this afternoon regarding expenditures and salaries. So I don't know if it's our negligence for not taking aggressive action to provide the funds to deliver the service. $140 million is a lot of money.
Pardon me, Councilmember, if I may address that. I'm Georgia Matera, Fire Administrator for the department. Those numbers are a little bit different because when you look at them, you'll see that a large portion of those numbers are those adjustments that are mandated by state and federal law through Medicare and Medi-Cal that we are mandated to write off of our books. Right now, what we're showing is those as receivables. So what we plan to do is we're going to be submitting, we're in the process of finalizing that report that will go on to the Board of Review and may get referred to Council that will write those off. So you'll start to see a cleaner number, which we average around $25 million per year, per fiscal year, that we do not collect. And if you take away the mandated adjustments, 25 million of such will go to collections. There is, however, a large portion of that 25 million that are for those people who are low income. And so once you write that number off, we're looking at around the range of maybe 5 to 7 million that is uncollectible or will be go to collections. So the number is a lot different when you see it laid out.
But it's been 6 years and we still haven't fixed it.
Yes. So we are in the process of fixing that currently.
It shouldn't take 6 years to fix it.
Well, and if I may, part of the point is that some of that is not fixable. It's the, for example, the Medi-Cal, Medicare, requirements that we accept a lower payment than our actual costs, and those have to be
That's a
written off as
bookkeeping
well.
correction.
Correct. But the balance of it.
But it's still
there are-
costing us money to provide that service.
Absolutely.
Now, what about the county? The county provides the paramedics at the scene. Then it's private contract to transport. They don't transport in the county of Los Angeles. It's all done by private.
That's correct.
How does the private do that and still survive if they're not collecting the money?
You know, we've gone back to the county, and we've asked to see some of the contracts. The contracts with the privates have been proprietary in a number of cases, and they haven't been that willing to share. We have gone back and been able to ask the county for some information, so we'd be happy to report back to you on how it works and
See, I'd like
the
to see-
information we do have.
I'd like to see how the county does it, and since Bill Fujioka used to be here, maybe he'd sense it to help us out with this. But the county provides that service, and those private ambulance services aren't going out of business. Somehow they're making something work. Maybe we need to look what they're, I'm not saying do away with what we're doing. Try and find out what their secret is to stay in business as a private enterprise and not fold shop and close. Because they still send the county rescue out, they send the private ambulance to transport, and it seems to work, and they're not facing a deficit, because if those private ambulances were, they'd be going out of business, and they're not. So maybe we need to figure out the secret that they have to collect the money, or whatever they're getting. Maybe the government's giving them more money than giving us. Somehow it seems to be working in the county, it's not working here financially. So hopefully we get this done before the next 6 years, because Pete will be retired by then.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the only absolute. Thank you, that's all I have.
And I want to just question two things. There was a dispute originally between finance and fire about 3,000 versus 5,000. That's all resolved now?
Yes.
So everyone's happy with 3. And then what do we do? You know, there are people, just because they're low income doesn't mean they may not have insurance. They may have a relatively low-paying job, but they may have job benefits and include insurance. So do we make sure that there isn't an insurance policy covering them, even if they qualify as low?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay,
We make
but-
sure that if they have insurance available, we do
That's
bill
first.
them, and that is first. That's
Okay.
correct.
Do we just ask, do you have insurance or not? Is that how we verify?
Typically, we'll ask, what will happen is when that person is admitted to the hospital, that hospital will get their insurance information. So we have a unit, a follow-up unit, that is specifically dedicated to doing hospital research.
okay.
And they are very successful in getting additional information from the hospital that we can bill.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, so with that, we will approve the item and send it forward.
Thank you.
Also, John White, there are
Okay, there are
three
recommendations. Ms.
Yeah.
Stengel put it out. Do you want to just put them in?
three
first?
ordinances on file, so you're going to receive and file the 2 previously issued ordinances and adopt a new one.
Yes, thank
Newest
you.
one.
And then there's an instruction to the Office of Finance as well.
We did that.
Okay.
We did that.
And what is the instruction for finance?
Who wants, I don't know, it's item 3 in my notes here. Instructing, just, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
Next item?
That concludes your agenda.
No public comment cards. We're done. Thanks, everybody.
Apparently they said it was resolved. There wasn't anyone. It was in the city attorney.